Hello, Salesforce developers. My name is John Dillon, and we're here to talk about Apex programming. Topic for today is going to be how to troubleshoot when we've got an issue in a trigger. So we'll do a few troubleshooting tutorials, but we're going to start today with trigger code. And we get a couple different issues that we might need to troubleshoot. The first one's when something drastic happens, and let's just take a look. For instance, here is the trigger code for the contact, and if we hit something really drastic, let's say an exception, it could be a null pointer exception, could be too many SQL queries, something like that. Those are actually pretty easy, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to just force one here. Okay, so what we've got, I've created a string, we haven't initialized it at all, and we're going to call trim on it, which is definitely going to give us a null pointer exception. But let's see what it looks like in the UI. So here I've got a contact open, and if I change something on the contact, like their phone number, we're going to get an error here. Tells us system null pointer exception. This is, of course, what our users see. They're going to be confused by it and call us. What we can do when we reproduce the scenario, we can see right here in the logs, attempt to dereference a null object. So these are really pretty straightforward. You double click on your log. Of course, you reproduce the error, and you double click on the log. When you find your error, right below the error that jumps up, almost always the next line, pretty close to it, it tells you exactly where your problem is. Contact trigger handler before update line 8. So when we look at our code and we go to line 8, we can see, all right, this is the line that caused the problem, and it doesn't take very long to, in this case, to look and see, oh, we've got an error here. We didn't initialize X. Some of them take a little bit more digging, but for the most part, they're nice. It's not nice for our users to see, but it's nice for us because we can we can jump right to where the problem is. So what I want to do is show you how to troubleshoot something that's a little more difficult to pinpoint. So I've introduced a bug to the system just for testing purposes, but we won't necessarily know what's going on, but we can say from our users, they're seeing a behavior that they don't expect. And so what we can see, they tell us when they set the title on a contact, the VIP checkbox is not always being checked. Now, this is a piece of functionality we developed here on this channel, so don't expect to see this in your own sandboxes or instances. But this is a kind of a fake requirement that we fulfilled a while ago. So let's just prove it out. So let's say we change this person's title from CIO to CEO, and we save it. Oh, VIP was already checked. All right, let's try this again. If we change it to CTO and we save it, we expect VIP would be checked, but it's not. So, CTO is one of the titles that should mark our contact as a VIP. So, we have to ask ourselves, well, what's going on? And, of course, hopefully our users gave us a reproduction scenario like what we just did. And we can look at our logs and see, obviously here's the error we saw earlier. But all of these past, saves have been successful. So we're not getting any obvious feedback that something's going wrong. So what we have to do in that case, first we want to start by just troubleshooting, well, not troubleshooting, but understanding the logic of what happens when this object is saved. So we're dealing with a contact. So what we could do is when we jump over to the contact object, we want to know, what are some of the things that happen? Are there flows that, that kick off? Are there workflows? We can look here under our flow triggers, and we can see we've got none. So that eliminates that. And hopefully, if this is a system you're familiar with, you've got a bit of an understanding of where to start. Sometimes we throw ourselves into systems where someone else has done the work, and now we're there to troubleshoot a problem. And that definitely is a little trickier because you have to do a bit of analysis to find out just how things work. But if we have a little bit of an understanding of how things work, that'll save us some time. So for instance, I know there are no workflows attached to the contact, so I'm not even going to look there. The next thing we can look at is triggers. And from having worked on this before, we've got a couple triggers. We should only have one, and I will say that's an anti-pattern. And if you don't know what that is, check out my free mini course on patterns and anti-patterns, and we dive deep into that. So we can, our starting point would be this contact trigger, which when we look at that code, we know our trigger doesn't do too much, but it passes off work to our contact trigger handler. So that's the first place where we're going to start looking. So we've got the contact trigger handler code. And let me just back up saying, I know in a real world system, it's more complicated than this. We might have multiple triggers happening, or multiple handlers, multiple objects being updated at the time. So, for the purposes of this, the method's going to be the same. But yes, it may take more than the length of this video to actually do some real troubleshooting in the real world. But this is how you go about it. This is how I go about doing it. You may have a different method. And if you've got other suggestions for how to go about this, feel free to leave those in the comments, because I always like having discussions around this stuff. So when we look at our before update code, if we're not familiar with it, we trace through the logic and see what's happening. We can see we build up an accounts map, and that's not too critical for what we're seeing. The accounts map in this case is because we also do updates to the accounts, but in this case, our user's noticing that our contact is not updating properly. So that part we don't care about. This is our main block of logic in this trigger handler, or at least what we've seen so far. So this is a good place to start. What we do is we loop through the contacts, we see if it's a VIP role, and if so, we set the contact status to true. And this code here, we've got a nice comment that tells us this is basically just working on the accounts. So again, for the purpose of this troubleshooting session, we can ignore that. And then since this is a before update, we don't have to do any update statements on the contacts. We're within a trigger and it is updating the contact. We're simply setting the flag. So there we go. So what we can see is we make a call, is VIP role. And, so one of the things we might start with is just studying a debug. What is this returning when we check it? So I might copy this. We're pretty sure it's being set to false, but let's just verify. You always want to really know. It's when you're troubleshooting something, taking guesses is a good way to spin your wheels and not make a whole lot of progress. If you don't know something, prove it to yourself, and that's gonna, help you actually move faster. Even though it seems like it's the longer road that we add extra debug statements or chase down paths, knowing is way more important than guessing. So sometimes we can guess and we get lucky, but most of the time, in my experience, that's a much longer path. Okay, so we will try it now that we've set our debug statement. And let's change this to CEO, which should give us the VIP status. VIP is blank. When we save it, VIP is still blank. It should be checked. When we look over at our debug statements, we can see that it's being set as false, which we kind of thought was happening, but now we know. It's good to just know these things. So that tells us we want to dig into is VIP role. So we don't need this anymore. We can look at the VIP role, and from a previous lesson or previous video, we're grabbing our config from system config. And if you are not familiar with that, just look back a couple weeks and we've got that one covered. So from our config, we've got a few things checking here. We want our, is our config size greater than 0? And once we get in, we grab from the config the roles field, and from here we split it, and that tells us whether we've got the role available or not. So what I would normally do here is just start putting in some debug statements, whether it's sanity checking. Let's take a look at our at the array that comes back, making sure we're getting something. I could either just do a system debug, or I could stick an else statement down here. For me, I like to do, when I put system debugs in, I just clean them out when I'm done, when I no longer need them. So I don't want to actually modify any code or any logic. And rather than do one debug statement at a time, at this point I'm going to save a little time and look through this code and see other breadcrumbs that I might want to leave. Now, if you've worked in another development environment like Java, C#, those are nice because they have an integrated debugger, and we would simply step through this code and see it. That's not an option, not a realistic option in Salesforce. So we do a lot of system debugs, and some people don't like that, but it's just the way it is. So, all right. So other things we might want to check is see what the role string is when it gets back. And then here, as long as it's not blank, we split it and we get an array of roles. And as we loop through the roles, we do a check. So it might be useful, sometimes it's useful to stick your debugs within the for loop. All right, so again, nothing that's really jumping out at us, but it'll help us see what's happening. There's certain things we're expecting, and our debug statements throughout the area of code will help guide us. It's also very possible that these will turn up nothing, and we'll have to dig a little further. But at least this is a good stopping point to go back, run the test, and see what our debug is giving us. So let's go back to CIO. And when we look at the debug output, you can filter on debug. Oops, grab the wrong log. So, all right, our config size is 1, and the role string is null. So that's definitely going to cause us a problem, right? If we're here and there is no role string on this config object, this is going to not execute because the string is blank. So we'll never get to this point where we check for the roles and return the true. So that tells us right there our problem is probably in our config. So let's take a look at that. and we look at our config, we can see the VIP roles is blank. So we found our problem, and that's the whole point of troubleshooting, is to try to find out where is this happening. And so we can fix it to back what it was before. I noticed the CTO is actually not in there. Let's put that back in there. Now, when we go to the contact, and let's set her back to CTO. All right, our flag is working. If you're curious, we can look at the logs and see, what was happening. And now, obviously this all looks healthy. We can go back in here and get rid of all of our debug statements. All right, and maybe do one more test just to make sure we didn't screw anything up. And it's working. We can let our users know. All right, as I said before, it's not always this easy. Obviously, this is an illustration, but that is the approach that you want to take. You want to figure out where in the code it probably is happening, whether it's a flow or Apex code, and then you just start doing some analysis and pinpointing, well, where is the problem might happen, and then what do you know versus what are you guessing is happening. So that's the crux of troubleshooting. In a future video, we'll do troubleshooting in a visual force context. As I mentioned earlier, I've got a mini course on Apex patterns and anti-patterns that will help you look for things to do, good practices to do in your Apex development, and also some pitfalls to avoid. And as I mentioned last week, I'm starting a program, and just for the month of September, I'm offering for free to give someone technical coaching along their path on Apex development. So I'm only going to take a couple people, I think 3, and this is only good for this month, September 2023. So if you're hearing this in the future, maybe keep your ears out. I might run something like this again. But for now, if you want some one-on-one time with me and some technical coaching, reach out, and either through my website, johndillon.us, or in the comments here, and we can talk about what that'll look like. I will talk to you later.